forgot my props here. I'm just going to grab those books. Thank you so much. Great. Okay, so thank you so much for convening this. This is such a cool topic. I had no idea that I had so much to say about this particular subject. I'm really kind of blown away by how much has come of it. What I want to suggest to you today, very humbly, is that there might be a direct line of influence between Adorno's concept of late style and Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus. Just kidding. That is canon. That is completely indisputable. There is rarely better documented cases of theoretical influence upon a novelist. Dear Teddy, what should I write? Dear Thomas, how about this? Dear Teddy, oh my goodness, it's beautiful. Yeah, so here, and it is beautiful, shockingly so. I'll talk a little bit about what Adorno's actual theory of late style is, and then we're going to mostly focus on how Mann is both a wonderful and really confusing, weird test case of Adorno's theory. I actually came up just the other day with an even better title for this talk, which is The Long Con, the late style. Yeah, late style in the curious case of Thomas Mann. Curious case, I actually haven't seen the Benjamin Button movie, but it sounds really pertinent. I should probably see it, maybe. Thomas Mann has what I'm going to call a backwards approach to lateness. And what I mean by that is he's a person born to lateness. He's a creature of lateness. If you look at some of his early works like Death in Venice, you see writings of and descriptions of, in the character, a person who is alienated from youth from the very beginning, self-consciously alienated from youth. There's a sense throughout Mann that he missed the heyday of German culture. Romanticism is dead. Goethe is long gone. He missed the party, and it's a bummer because this guy is Germany in his heart and soul. That's a problem for him for reasons. There's an incident from the life of Thomas Mann that is doubled in Felix Krull, his last novel, which is most of what I'm going to talk about, where apparently the little Thomas Mann and little Felix would like to play charades and be different characters, and one of the favorite characters was to be the emperor. And young Thomas Mann insisted, and Felix too, I believe, on being schlepped around in a wagon and venerated as the emperor. So let's say you're born in 1875 and your dream job is to be the Kaiser. Like, you're kind of screwed, right? It's like you miss the party. That's kind of a bummer if that's your thing. And being a creature of imperialism, being Thomas Mann's thing, not my favorite thing about him, but it's the case. All this is to say that, in some sense, Mann has always kind of been doing lateness. Sometimes in the explicitly Adornian sense, which actually I'm going to talk about a little bit right now. If I had gotten this a bit prepared, I actually would have either put up here or handed out some sheets with quotations. I can send this around after or post it to the little place in the app where you can share documents, I think. I can absolutely do that if it's of interest. Here's what I'm just going to say right off hand. These are some translations from two parts of Adorno's essay on Beethoven's late style. Just question, how many people have read that essay? How many people know this essay? Nice. Was that essay the inspiration, to any degree, the inspiration for the?
Adorno is one of the main people who theorize late style. Yeah.
Part of the reason I ask is because what I study is very kind of Adorno-centric in general, so I was curious, is Adorno's late style the kind of touchstone in other comparative disciplines? Sounds like maybe. It's kind of hard to get around the guy. Yeah, all right. Well, I will not be trying to get around the guy. Here's 2 points that I want to take from his essay on late style. First is the famous beginning of that essay, wherein we are told the differences between the ripening of artistic style and of fruit. This is my best attempt to render Adorno's prose here. The ripeness of the late works of significant artists does not resemble that of fruit. They are in general not round, but furrowed, indeed, riven. They take care to dispense with sweetness and tartly refuse it, their very taste being prickly. They lack all that harmony that the classical aesthetic used to demand of artworks, and show traces of history more than of growth. Second principle I want to bring out from the Adorno is the concluding idea of unreconciled contrasts as the source of energy and power in works of late style. Adorno talks about an igniting between extremes. He's talking about Beethoven, but this is eminently transferable. An igniting between extremes which tolerates no more a secure center or harmony arising from spontaneity. But the caesuras, the sudden breaking off that more than anything else characterized Beethoven's last works, are in that instant the breakthrough. The work falls silent as it is forsaken and turns its emptiness outward. Only then is the next broken piece added on, for the secret is between them and could be expressed in no other way than in the figure that together they create. I am leaving aside the complicated issue of so-called objective and subjectivity in this, partly because it doesn't transfer super well to Mann. Maybe it's just better for music criticism in general. In any case, I think if one were intent on it, one could probably triangulate backwards from this business of fruitiness or lack thereof and unreconciled contrast to what is meant to be said about these kind of difficult categories in that essay. So that is why I am giving short shrift to the important idea of subjectivity in that essay. So here's our problem. So Thomas Mann, as I've said, he's a late comer. He's not a late bloomer. He's a late comer. He's an early bloomer. When you have been writing lateness of some sort, sometimes really, really explicitly Adornian lateness, for your whole life, especially your late but not latest very great masterwork, Dr. Faustus, where do you go from there facing your own actual lateness? How do you add a late style to a style that has always been so very inflected by lateness? The perfect answer that's also a whole bunch of problems, is Felix Krull, Thomas Mann's last novel. The full name of it is the Confessions of Felix Krull, Confidence Man, Hochstapler. It is different than all of Mann's other novels. One of the reasons, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I think it's a perverse example of a late work in the Adornian style, before I say why I think it's a perfect example. One reason that this Felix does not seem to resemble a late work in the Adornian sense, it's the most plump and juicy and round and summery and fruity and delicious of all of Mann's novels. I'm pretty sure. There's a couple I haven't read. I looked them up to see if they sound like they might potentially undermine the statement I just made. I don't even want to read them. They sound awful. I'll have to come back to that. Anyway, this is, as far as I'm aware, Mann's most plump and delectable kind of work. Not like an old fruit that has petrified over a bit and become hard and rough and spiky. Felix is the only one of Mann's works where it is from the perspective of the beautiful young man rather than the perspective of one of the men desiring the beautiful young man. That's a reversal. That's an important reversal. Felix Krull, he is not just any beautiful young man. He, in his own words, he is a Sunday's child. He is lucky in love. He is gifted. He is special. He is blessed. He has good fortune in all that he does. He is a con artist with the emphasis on artist. And Mann is ostensibly serious about that. What it means to be serious about that is kind of part of the problem. But in any case, art. Felix is an artist. Worth noting, this is, in a sense, no late work at all. This is an early short story, a very early short story, taken up in the late years, expanded into a novel, an unfinished novel that nevertheless ends at the absolute perfect moment. Way to die at the right time, Thomas Mann. It's astonishing, right? It's like the perfect perverse form for a late work. The other thing, to me the most interesting, one of them, that makes Felix a perverse example of late style is the fact that it is so consistent with everything that Mann has always been doing. So consistently. If I had to quickly say what are these things that Mann does so consistently in his themes and his strategies, I would say a phrase that comes up from the very beginning, from Tonio Kruger, his early novella, is the bad conscience of the artist, right? Felix is a confidence man who is an artist. The space between con artist and artist is Thomas Mann's playground. What is this bad conscience of the artist a cipher for? It's deliberately very hard to say. If I had to try to say, I would say the bad conscience of the artist is a cipher for gayness and maybe a little taste for German proto-fascism. Just, a little uncomfortable, but, what are you going to do about it? Mann's most consistent way of expressing this bad conscience, finding ways to talk about those themes with plausible deniability, especially finding ways to talk about same-sex love and romance and desire and sex with plausible deniability. So here I'm going to give us a little foreshortened history of Mann saying gay without saying it. And goodness, I sure owe Governor DeSantis or whoever it is for that phrase. It's just perfect here. Here is Mann showing his hand in the beginning of Death in Venice, which is about a writer. Once, in an inconspicuous place, Aschenbach, our writer, protagonist of Death in Venice, had stated outright that almost every great opus has come into being despite grief, torment, poverty, abandonment, physical weakness, vice. In German, that is Laster, a word we have seen in the Magic Mountain as a euphemism. Vice as in we're not going to say what kind of vice. Laster, the same word. Vice, passion, etc. Death in Venice, quote, continues. This, for Aschenbach, is more than an observation, it's his own experience. It was quite simply the formula for his life and his fame, the key to his oeuvre. Again, that is a quote from Death in Venice, describing what Aschenbach is doing. Later in Death in Venice, we have Mann doing exactly what he just said Aschenbach always does. Here's the quote. He, Aschenbach, had a sudden urge to write. What prompted it? Scarcely mattered. A question, a challenge, about a certain great and burning issue of culture and taste that had been raised as revelation in the intellectual world, and the query had reached the traveler. He was familiar with the subject. He had experienced it. And all at once he could not resist a craving to make it glisten with his language. Skip some years ahead. Here he is in Joseph and His Brothers, as different a novel as you could theoretically get. It is about the biblical tale. Okay, the world of anecdotes, writes our omniscient narrator in Joseph, is full of tales of how lads dressed as women have turned men's heads, of how girls in trousers have ignited the passions of their own sex. But discovery ceased to dampen any such feelings, for with it, beauty had become impractical. There's a euphemism. Cases in which beauty triumphs over manifest impracticality and retains its unconditional effect upon the emotions are in the minority, but do demonstrably occur. These are all examples where Mann is choosing an inconspicuous place to say the key thing, and then, with nothing to signal its importance, And then he is confusing on purpose, but meanwhile unambiguous. He is unambiguous, and also it's just hard to understand what he is saying. So there's our plausible deniability. Does the exact same thing in Felix. There are some important differences, though. The biggest difference I'm going to say is tone, and that's back to our question of the spiky, prickly fruit versus the peach that is Felix, just provisionally speaking here. For the rest of the talk, what I want to talk about is Felix as a seeming counterexample to Adorno's theory of late style. That's actually a perfect example that tells us something about the theory, how it can be extended, and what it's useful for. So Felix Kuhn, as this late work that is in some ways the seeming worst example of an Adornian late work. Mann's strategy has always been to offset confessional moments with distancing, alienating, ironizing moments, so that moments of sweetness are rendered not embarrassing by contrast with their ironizing context. He's always done that. It works beautifully in, for example, The Magic Mountain. Having always done this, this gives Mann's actual late style a freedom, a new freedom for play, for something else, to try something else, after having done so much of the same thing. He's still got the unreconciled contrasts. What I'm going to say about Felix is they're just not always on the surface. It's the same thing, it just works out differently, it looks differently than Mann's very explicitly Adornian late works. So here, let's take a look. I'm not saying, by the way, that Felix is a more optimistic book than any others. I'm just saying it's maybe more fun, and if nothing else, boy, do the characters have more fun. They have more fun. I'm pretty sure they have more sex than in any other Thomas Mann novel combined. So I'm going to read an example of Felix having a fun time with a person he has recently met. Felix is and just bear in mind as I'm reading, how is this late style? So Felix, our handsome German youth, appealing to everyone he meets, our Sunday's child, he has conned his way into a position in a very fancy Parisian hotel where he runs an elevator for the moment before he's promoted to elsewhere. A lady comes into his hotel and into his elevator whom he had she had caught his eye at a train station earlier, whereupon, like a good artist, he stole her jewelry, because art. So she turns up in his elevator. He, of course, is, oh my goodness, it's her. He catches her eye this time. She starts a flirtation, asks Felix to help her out of her coat. Her name, this is Madame Houfflet. Madame Houfflet says, you are undressing me, darling menial. An incredible woman and very articulate. Taken aback but full of determination, I managed to reply, would God, madam, that time permitted me to accept that interpretation and go on as long as I liked with this enchanting occupation. Ah, you have no more time for me. Unhappily not at this moment, madam. But you would have time for me if you had time for me. An endless amount, madam. When will you have time for me, she asked. At 11 o'clock I shall be off duty. I shall wait for you then. Here is my pledge, and before I knew what she was about, my head was between her hands and her mouth on mine in a kiss that went quite far enough to make it an unusually binding pledge. So then 11 o'clock comes around. Felix knocks at door 23, and inclining my ear, knocked discreetly, and inquiring, entrez? In a slightly surprised tone, answered me. Why, what's this? A hotel employee? A domestic? A young man of the people? The class inflection here is significant. Comes into my room at this hour when I have already retired. The kiss from the elevator is repeated. Felix says she not only carried this kiss to even greater lengths than the one that afternoon, with no lack of cooperation from me, she also took my hand and guided it inside her décolletage to to her breasts, which were very nicely fitted to the hand, moving it about by the wrist so that my manhood, as she could not fail to notice, was most urgently aroused. That happens all the time in Mann, but we are never told about it like that. Aroused manhood is not a phrase that Mann allows to enter his vocabulary prior to this extension. This kind of stuff is not in the short story version. This is the late Thomas Mann. Okay. Touched by this observation, about the aroused manhood, she cooed, "Oh, lovely youth, far fairer than this body that has the power to inflame you." Then she began to tug at the collar of my jacket with both hands, unhooked it, and with incredible speed proceeded to undo the buttons. Off, away with that, and away with that," her words tumbled out. "Off and away so that I can see you, catch sight of the god. Quick help!" This character is a famous author, like her creator Thomas Mann. Her thing appears to be verbiage and pontificating during sex. So it's, "Oh, you angel of love," she's going on like this the whole time. "Oh, you young devil, you naked boy, how you can do it." Then, "Call me too," she suddenly groaned near the climax. "Be familiar with me," grammatically that is, only this guy. "Degrade me. Oh, je t'adore, petit esclave stupide qui me déshonore." Again, the class stuff is important. She came, we came. That doesn't happen in Thomas. People don't come in Thomas Mann. People don't have fun in Thomas Mann. Death in Venice, it's, "You must never smile at anyone like that again." Here it's, "Why are your clothes still on? Please, help me immediately." Okay, so what we got here, it's kind of like a funny little reversal of the Walpurgisnacht scene from the Magic Mountain, except there it is Hans Castor who's pontificating at the woman. There, too, it's made this sort of inverted queer thing, which I won't get into because I'm probably running out of time. I will say the big difference here, then, is that Hupfle gets to actually say the thing that no one else in Thomas Mann gets to say. "Would you believe, beloved, that I have loved only you, always only you, since I was able to feel?" That means, of course, not you, but the idea of you. The lovely instant you incarnate. Call it perversion if you will, but I detest the grown man, full-bearded and woolly-chested, the mature and significant man. Dreadful. I am significant myself. That is why it's only you boys I have loved from the beginning, but it's admittedly quite sad and painful for a woman to be able to love a man only when he is quite young, when he is a boy. C'est un amour tragique, inadmissible, not practical, that's that Joseph word, not for life, not for marriage. I live in my so-called perversion, in the love of my life that lies at the bottom of everything I am, in the happiness and misery of this enthusiasm with its heavy curse that nothing in the whole visible world equals the enchantment of the youthful male. She did not on that account cease her endearments, and I must admit that so much praise and adulation, finally even expressed in poetry, had greatly excited me. Although my offering in our first embrace had been my utmost, she found me once more in my manly state. Okay, so how is this late style? It's what he's been always doing, but it's beyond it in two ways. One is that because there's so much comedy in this scene, he can actually go to the tragic place. He can actually say, "This is what my life is really like. This is what it's like to be. This is what it is like to be me." And part of the reason he can do that is because he's made this inversion here, where he's speaking as the beautiful boy. And so one of the many characters get to say these things about Felix. That's the opposite of how everything else has always worked in Mann. And it gives him this new freedom. So I'm just going to say, by way of wrapping up, that part of why I think this is an absolutely perfect work is that, a perfect late work, rather, in the Adornian sense, is that the idea of having this last work be something that is set off from the late styles that come before it is that contrast is kind of exactly what Adorno is talking about. if I had had a little bit more time, I was going to play a musical example from Schubert's last work, Schwanengesang, which is not actually written as a song cycle. It is a series that editors tend to collect as his sort of creepy intoned last works. The very last of them is it's like Felix. It's a gentle, beautiful, little endearing gem called Die Taubenpost. And it doesn't sound like late style. It sounds like it could come from any point in Schubert except for the fact that it has such a mature, wise kind of economy. In any case, though, the sense I'm getting from this is that you can produce that frisson of unresolved contrast by taking what looks like a juicy fruit and holding it up right next to the riven, furrowed one. That has helped me very much think of what it means for a chronically late person like Thomas Mann to do late style. It has completely changed the way that I read Felix Krull. And the next thing I'm going to do is go well, as I was looking through Death in Venice, I realized how often the word fruit comes up. There's something to this that I think is deeply rooted throughout the corpus, and I'm definitely going to go looking for it. All I'll say in the meantime is that sometimes some fruits ripen backwards. Let's just put it that way. Thomas Mann seems to be one of them. All right, thanks everyone.
So